It's the Liars Club Oddcast, a weekly conversation filled with insights, tips, and secrets from the myriad of creative people who make stuff up for a living. Stay tuned and you could hear from New York Times bestselling authors, National Book Award finalists, debut novelists, screenwriters, musicians, composers, cartoonists, actors, stand-up comedians, line tamers, and all manner of creators who burn the midnight oil and sometimes their dinner. Whether you're a reader or a fellow writer, join us as we plumb the depths of the creative process for inspiration, semi-plausible stories, and a few laughs. So grab a libation, sit back, and spend some quality time with the creative folks who make stuff up for a living in a lively conversation with the Liars Club. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, here we are with the Liars Club Oddcast, and we are, during our 4-week hiatus, bringing you 4 roundtables that we've done in the past and sort of putting together into a block of roundtables in the next 4 weeks, a summer writer's block party, if you will. And we're starting this whole thing off with research. And in our discussion, and of course these deep intellectual discussions we have here, we were discussing why we're starting with research, why is research important, that kind of thing. I was just curious, why did you guys decide research? Because I didn't decide, I let them decide. Why is research important? Why should we start with research? Why do we do that?
Well,
go ahead, Mary.
Maybe it's good to know what you're going to write about. And before you write, you do your research.
There's a lot of pantsers that would argue otherwise. You know that.
Well, you need to know the information. And even if you're not writing according to an outline, you still need to know what it is you're talking about, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. What are you going to say?
That doesn't stop me. No,
most people are inspired by their research. So, and inspiration usually comes at the beginning of the process. So.
Yeah, I think, research is one of those things that happens or can happen at any stage in the process. It can come at the end when you go and you find out what you did wrong, or, try to figure out ways to bail your ass out of the hole that you inadvertently dug yourself into. But yeah, it's also, it can come before anything else. It's where ideas come from. It's where ideas get fleshed out. It's where ideas get kind of structured and, where they take real specific shape, when you figure out what works and what doesn't. A lot of that is dependent on research.
And I think some of the best material you get comes out of the research. There's so much stuff that I find when I'm researching like a historical story or a novel, that's better material than anything I could have invented. Mm-hmm. That the research is absolutely necessary at some point in the creation process.
Yeah, and I think with a lot of other writers, I know for me personally, I've gotten lots and lots of ideas for other stories while researching. While researching one story, I learn things that spark ideas that lead to other stories. It's a great way to kind of get ideas for other projects.
So the answer
a way to procrastinate.
Which I
believe we cover in the
I think we cover that. Yeah.
We do actually. We do talk about it.
So maybe we should.
I can't write. I need to research some more.
Yeah. So on that note, Kelly, as we're moving into the content that's covered in the roundtable, then we'll move on to the roundtable with the concept here that the reason we're picking this as the first one is because it's at the very base of and supports most everything you do in terms of your writing. Whether it becomes the beginning, the middle, or the end, it's always something that supports everything you're doing, and it's also an idea generation place. And the idea that truth is stranger than fiction sometimes gives you ideas that are good for your fiction.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, then. Well, without further ado, off we go to the roundtable about research.
Here we are. We're back, ladies and gentlemen. We're back with that Liars Club Adcast?
The Adcast. The Outcast.
The Outcast.
Like $25.
Yes.
The Liars Club Outcast. Get out of here.
The Liars Club Oddcast once again, and we are at a round table. And this time we're discussing something great fun.
Oval.
We're going to be discussing research.
Threat or menace.
Yes. So we have around the table, we have Keith Strunk,
Kelly Simmons,
Gregory Frost,
Jon McGoran,
Mary Jones.
And so we're going to be talking about
And
research.
her
And who
orchestra.
wants to talk about research? Who's going to
Some
start?
people love research.
I love it.
I do. I love research. I've
I
been
do.
doing it for years.
Yeah, because it keeps you
And,
from writing.
That's right.
That's exactly right.
Lets you procrastinate.
Yeah, but if you do it, you can get so lost in it
Yeah.
that you absolutely
It's not
forget the reason that you started.
How
to do
much
When-
is too much?
When do you start doing research for a book?
Long time before.
Middle, or after?
All.
I do all.
Oh.
I do it. I stop and do
Sometimes
this.
you have to stop.
I mean, a lot of times the research is the part that comes first. You know, that's where you get
That's
the
right.
idea for
Most-
the book.
I think
That's
most
right.
people think of it that way, but I often need it in the middle.
I have a question. I mean, I know I'm diverting. I can't help myself, but I'm feeling a little crazy. I've been up since 2 in the morning.
We've
What
been
can I tell you?
diverted.
So you're
What were
talking
you
about
doing up until
research.
2 in the morning? Research.
Now they were chatting.
But there's different kinds of research.
So my question is, I've written nonfiction books, there's history books. That's one kind of research.
That's all research.
So yeah, but it's not. Is nonfiction book research different than fiction book research? And if it is, how?
Good question. And you know what? Kelly and I will probably disagree on this.
Okay, well, you go first,
Yeah.
and then she can duke it out.
Because I
We'll just
think
watch.
you need to use the same kind of research for
I
fiction as you do.
agree.
Oh, you
No.
agree?
But
You wanna change your position?
but you process it differently, and you might take notes differently. But it's the process. I think is the same.
But if you're using information in your book that is based, let's say, on location or on science or on law, I believe it needs to be accurate.
Oh, now we're going to
See,
disagree.
this is where we're going to disagree. I think with science, you have to have it in a foundation so you can depart from reality, but it has to be grounded in real fact.
To be able to springboard into
Yes.
fantasy or
And with law, you have to have the actual law, unless you're writing a science fiction book or something like that. But
Whoa, wait, what?
I mean, if you're putting it in a place where the laws are different.
Okay, that's different.
You're making stuff
Right.
up.
I think most people would agree with you that the best fiction is grounded in real research, in factual. But where we disagree is in terms of the names of places and maybe fudging some of the events. Because I think if you're writing fiction, you're writing fiction.
Okay,
So-
but this is where I think we disagree, and I
That's
could
what
be
I-
wrong.
yeah.
Because I think that if you're writing, for example, a fiction book based on a real historical event or a real historical figure, you can't just say things about that person or place that are randomly.
You have
Well,
an
I-
obligation to the material
But
to be
people
as
do it
accurate
But-
as
Yeah.
all the
possibly
time, and they
can.
become bestsellers.
Yes.
I
They
think,
do.
but I think so.
So-
I think kind of the baseline, the very, at the very, very least, you need to know what you're making up and what is the product of your
yes,
research.
that's what I said.
At
The
some point, you
process
make a decision.
of how you write
But
it
if you're-
down and
Yeah.
what you do with it afterwards might be different.
Well, and when
The
you're writing it, when you
gathering
say
the facts is the
you
same.
have this bedrock of fact,
Right.
and then you create this structure
But
of
it needs
fiction
to
on
be
top of it.
clear what the structure of fiction is, because otherwise you're presenting something that didn't happen as if it did, and people will not know because people don't know.
People don't know, and it's I
and
mean it's a
people
tricky.
don't care.
It's well,
A
but
lot
they
of
do
people
care.
don't.
They
They
might.
do
Depends
care.
on the genre.
I mean,
Whether
a lot
they
of
do
people,
or not,
You're right.
they're
You're
still
right.
getting
I'm
false
backtracking.
information.
a lot of people learn stuff from fiction.
Yeah.
And it's a tricky thing because if you're, whether you're writing something that is, kind of a science fiction extrapolation of existing science,
Lincoln
or
in Navarro.
if you're taking something that happened in history and kind of building a fictional construct on it, part of the reason that people read those things is to geek out over the facts that are in it.
But the geeking out fact can be the tiniest little nugget.
Yes,
George
they can.
Saunders did not hew completely to the historical truth
No, he
when
did
he
not.
wrote Lincoln
Lincoln
in
in
Navarro.
Navarro.
Right.
You
Well,
know, Z, about Zelda
Zelda.
Fitzgerald. It starts with just a kernel, and then the rest is fiction built around it. So I don't think you have to hew as closely in certain genres.
I don't think so
Which
either.
kernel was that?
Well, because
Kernel, yes.
you've got these tensions. You've got these
Yes.
tensions. You've got the tension of reportage and the tension of telling a good story.
Correct.
And the last thing you want to do while you're telling a story is say, okay, here is where I'm leaving what is real, and now I'm entering, the part that I'm making up, because
Right.
you're going to lose
Right.
the reader.
No, you
the
want
reader.
No, it has to be
making up to
seamless,
blend
but-
Exactly.
seamlessly with the stuff that's
But
real.
then you
research.
have
So they
some
can't tell.
responsibility to the accurate person or accurate event
You
or
should.
accurate
You
history.
Yeah.
should if you're a nice
You
person.
should. If you're
And
writing
that's-
about the Civil
legally
War,
you don't.
really better.
That's for
get
when,
it right,
that's for
'cause they'll
when for
come
readers
you
to
when
come
you're
out
right.
to author events and ask you.
right,
Yeah.
but it's
Correct.
it's fiction. It's
But
it's
it-
supposed
Exactly.
to be. It's,
Yeah.
But you can't defame somebody or
People
a
do it-
historical person or destroy them just because you.
They do it all the
They
time.
do it all all the time, and I think it's so.
I agree.
Okay, that's a moral
I think it's
stance you can
ethical.
take,
Yeah,
an ethical
unethical.
stance you can take, I suppose.
But it's not illegal.
No, it's not. That's true, because
they're dead.
historical
They can't
fiction.
Not
sue
that,
you.
not that the Liars Club ever gives legal advice.
Yeah, right, exactly.
No, in fact, let's have a disclaimer right now. We are not giving anyone legal
Next
advice. and we're not
roundtable.
responsible
But
for
there are other
any of the
reasons
advice
you
that
need
leaks out
to
here.
make sure you're accurate. And I'll give an example of someone who will remain nameless, whose books I don't read anymore because of this. I was reading.
I did it one time.
And she's
Yeah, but-
never forgiven
And
you.
I'm not forgiving you. This author had her character sculling in the Schuylkill River, which is something I do often, and her boat flipped. And in the book, the boat sank, and the sculler was in deep doo-doo. Well, in the river.
And there's doo-doo down there.
Yeah.
Judo in the river. Yeah.
That's
But
right.
the truth is that a sculling boat will not sink.
Sink, right.
And
So-
because she had it so wrong, I won't read her books.
Yeah,
I don't trust her anymore.
Right.
Yeah, let me,
Right.
and that to me is, I mean, this is an interesting sort of, when you talk about fiction and putting fiction together, we talk about this too in terms of stage, in terms of stage and theater and that sort of thing. If you do something on stage that is so off the curve for somebody, and you pull them out of the reality,
Right. It will bother everyone.
It
and,
will.
and you're
They've
lost.
stopped
And
being
that's hard.
lost in your play,
Right.
and they're
Yeah.
now sitting in an audience looking at a bunch of people on stage going,
Right.
this is annoying.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's an
Right.
incredible.
This is what film all the time.
It's really
Yeah.
such a relationship of trust. You
Yeah.
have with your readers.
Yes.
You want them to trust you so that they will believe the reality that you're creating. So they
Yeah.
will allow these characters to get in their heads and everything. And if you do something to screw that up, and it could be something really minor like that,
Like that, the boat-
and you've lost them, and it takes a lot to get them back, and you might not ever get them back.
no, exactly
And,
right.
and depending on the type of, if you're writing historicals, for instance, depending on the type of information you get wrong, you have to assume you will probably at some point get something wrong.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's
And
almost
readers are
unavoidable.
smart.
Very.
Yes.
Well, and some readers
Eagle-eyed.
take joy in
And
finding
finding
those
your
things.
mistakes.
So one
and
thing I
feeling
think-
smarter
Yes,
than
right,
you.
right.
Yeah.
One thing I think is an important distinction is, there is kind of a body of knowledge, whether it's scientific, whether it's historical, whether it's geographical. I guess if it's geographical, you can find out. But history is not complete, and
Not by a
scientific
long shot.
knowledge is not complete.
Right.
So if if your extrapolations or your fictionalizations or whatever start off at the edge of what is known and then fill in the blanks, that's one thing.
Yes.
But if you contradict things that are known
Yes.
or knowable, that's when you're going to run
Well
into huge
said,
trouble.
John.
So essentially, my book about Lincoln crossing the Delaware to fight the British, not going to work.
You can do
Well,
that.
I think you can.
I
See, this
mean-
is the thing. I hate to be the devil's advocate all the time, but there's so many instances where you see people have done this extremely successfully. I agree with you generally, and that's kind of the way that I write and the way that I approach things and the way you approach. But people can have different approaches because they're writing fiction.
I mean, if you're writing an alternate history or spec fiction or something, you can.
Abraham Lincoln, vampire hunter.
Sure, right.
that's what-
But that was so obviously extreme.
Of course it
It
is.
could have happened.
And the Underground Railroad, that
What,
book
Colson
about.
Whitehead?
Yeah, but that is that was an extreme too, because it was a
Extreme.
crazy
Yeah,
extrapolation.
exactly. So extreme that it's
so
not
extreme.
even.
But there are so many, particularly in women's fiction, historical women's fiction,
Okay, so-
where they do really take huge liberties with real people's historical
Right.
arcs.
Right.
I'll tell you what,
We're going to let Greg go in here.
I'm
because
always
he's trying.
fascinated with the way people deal with research and the different ways that we all approach it. But one of the most interesting ones I ever heard was I went to a reading by Diane McKinney Whetstone, and she was reading from a book that she'd written that was set in the 1940s, and one of the people in the audience asked her about doing the research, and she said she didn't do any research for it at all until she had written a draft of the book.
Right.
And then
She made up everything about the 1940s.
As a placeholder.
as a placeholder.
What she did was she guessed
Yeah.
how it would be.
Well,
Yeah.
that
And
keeps
she
you in
wrote
the
it,
flow.
And then she went back in
Nothing wrong
round
with that.
2 and she did all of the actual historical research, and she was, as she said, pleased to find out that she'd gotten most of it right.
It's amazing
So
how
it
much
was-
stuff you get right
Yes.
just your suppositions, and then
Right.
you do the research.
Right.
Yeah, so
But
then
if
all
you're-
she had to do was sort of like tweak and adjust.
Depends on
and
how much you
rewrite
love
some
research
stuff,
and how much
etc.
time you have.
I'll tell you what, every book, and I'm sure it's true for everybody, I learn a ton of stuff because I have to research whole new topics. I have to research brain injuries, or I have to research narcolepsy or drug research or something, something new with each relics.
So what are you going to call the musical?
It's just you want to get those details right and you want to make it real.
And a lot of the best material that you inject into your fiction ends up coming out of that research. It's all worth doing. Like this book I'm collaborating on with Jonathan right now is set in 12th century Scotland. I did the research, I did the first draft of the novel. And in digging around trying to find out, I start writing the thing and go, okay, he's going to a town. What the hell did towns look like in the 1100s in Scotland?
Right. Thank God there's Minecraft.
It turns out the
signs?
1100s is where King David of Scotland first created real towns, where they actually decided towns will have this layout, they'll have this street, things will look like this, etc., names, etc. And you're going, well, shit, that's like the best information I could have. I couldn't have made that up, and thank God that's the time it happened, because otherwise there would have been a bunch of huts and there's no town, So the research sort of wrote the scene as a result of finding that out.
Most people
that
say
sort
that.
of jumps into a question I had as I've been listening to you guys talk about it. How much does the research? I know that you're a
Writer?
No, an outliner. An outliner. You outline hard, right?
Me.
And you do. John does. And I know you've also said that the outline shifts and changes as you go sometimes. So obviously, as you're writing a book, it will alter, it will change. How much does the research impact the creative process of creating the world of the book?
Well,
how does it inspire? Does it inspire?
We're talking about this a lot. There's basically two forms of research. There's the research you do in preparation for the book that's kind of like charging the idea and getting you started. But there's also the research you're doing while you're writing the book, or after you've written the book and you're coming back and you're revising the book. You keep learning and finding out more and more things.
I think of it as like expansive. So there's the research that kind of builds the idea, and then there's the research that tightens it back in, things you can't do.
I kind of do big scale stuff, and then you go in for details. You're like, oh shit, what color is the blah blah blah?
Yeah.
But most writers I talk to say that they get a lot of their best plot ideas in that early research phase.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they learn something that just sparks an idea.
And it might shift your whole topic.
But there's like, one of the dangers is, when you're doing the research and you come across this really cool thing, it doesn't quite fit, but like it's so cool, you just kind of cram it in there,
exactly. It doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing,
then your editor tells you to get rid of it.
It's tempting.
Yeah.
The other thing that happens too is that people will read your book and they'll go, well, that's impossible. And you go, no, that's the actual thing that came out of
That's
the
Brad
research.
Parks was just saying that. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
That's the thing that came out of the real research.
Yeah.
Two lies and a truth.
Yeah.
Okay, that's funny.
Yeah.
That's just
happens all the time.
What about in terms of the methods we use to do you guys travel to your locations?
Yes.
Do you go to the library? Do you work online?
I mean, if possible, you do. And one of the things, I was writing one of the D.H. Dublin books, and I had a body was going to be found in, a churchyard in Old City.
Yes.
And it was a place that I'd been to a bazillion times, but I was like, no, I should, scout it out. It's a pretty big scene, and otherwise I wouldn't have at the time. And it was shocking to me.
It always looks different than you remember.
It's so much different than how you remember it,
I've had the same experience.
Yeah.
That's a perspective thing, because I've location scouted for shoots,
right,
shoots.
Right.
And so, you may go to a place you go to all the time, but when you're going for a location scout, now you're going, wait, the camera's there, the lake's here, where's the light,
tree?
where are the trees, where's the sun going, where's the shadow?
Can we shoot this so that we won't see this other building over here that's the wrong period?
Right, exactly.
Right.
So it's a completely different eye. Has to be, so that makes perfect sense.
But another thing about going to locations is it's a wonderful write-off for writers.
If you make money.
Or if you can carry loss for 3 years.
Yes.
Just saying.
Not that we give legal or accounting advice.
That's not.
That's a different kind of research.
We're going to perform surgery later on the Oddcast.
Next on the Oddcast.
I've got
the Odd
this
Cut.
little cyst.
Could you guys take this out for me?
Next week, take out your own appendix.
If you did
Kelly sings
something
in
like
it.
that, say I wanted to
didn't
do
go
a book about facelifts, and I went and got one, would that be a write-off?
Oh, good thinking.
Wow, that's clever.
Botox?
Yeah, all that, any of the above.
I don't
You
know.
probably are going to have
You know what it would be fun?
at some
It'd be
point.
fun
my next
to
book-
get
my next book is
an
about a nice hoppy
entertainment lawyer
IPA.
or an entertainment
There you go.
accountant for the Oddcast.
I had to drink a lot of
What's that? What's
We should be fun to get an entertainment lawyer and an entertainment
Yeah,
accountant for the
yes,
Oddcast
yes.
and,
That's a great
and ask
idea.
them all these silly
We
questions.
should cut that out, but that's
Yes, sorry.
no, that's
Yeah.
a great
No,
idea.
you can't write that off.
But
I think there are other kinds of research as well, and the worst kind is is that, oh my God, you're 3/4 of the way through the draft and you come up against something, you realize that you've got some sort of logic flaw or something, and
it
you have
to Diane if she wasn't.
And again, most of the time, fate will save your ass, but every now and again, it's like, nope. That ain't gonna work. That ain't gonna work.
Back here and figure out where I go.
But that's logic or research?
Well, logic and the assumptions
guns
that you're
weren't
making.
invented in that year.
Oh, yeah.
Shit. When you're done.
Yeah, right.
That's absolutely
also,
the
you can
case.
make choices though that go against what research is going to tell you, because wasn't it Lisa and
Lisa and James Ransom.
And James Ransom, right? And James said that in most of the pictures, Harriet Tubman appears with a gun.
Mm-hmm.
And he chose not to put the gun in.
Mm-hmm.
So you can make choices,
Yes.
even in history,
Sure.
that goes
you can.
against the research for a basic
Right.
perspective or a basic reasoning. It was a children's book, and that was his choice.
Right.
Right.
Well, I mean, every depiction of every time and place doesn't have to be typical of that time and place.
Right.
Well, deleting
that's true.
things, I think,
In fact,
is a little
it's typical
safer than
of time.
adding,
Than adding stuff,
them,
right.
which can be dangerous.
Right. It's like she carried a machete. That would be bad.
Exactly.
But a lot of this depends on what kind of book you're writing.
Yes.
So I wrote 2 books that are set in Bronze Age Ireland, and I became obsessive about the research and ended up bicycling the route. It's the cattle.
Because they had bikes back
Kool-Aid.
then.
They didn't have bikes back then, but they did have a map of where everybody went. So I bicycled.
They didn't have toilets
Because
then.
bicycles and kilts is a really tricky
But
combination.
But so
Crazy.
that's obsessive research when you get to the point where I'm going to ride the route and write down everything I see and map it out.
Yeah.
Which of course is
And
different.
you have to be careful because some beginning writers really believe, it's like the Hemingway phenomenon, they believe that they have to go and run with the bulls to write about the bulls. And
Right.
you don't really have to
Oh,
spend
you
that.
don't have to kill somebody to write about murder?
No, but you know what I mean.
It helps.
I mean, you know what I mean.
And it's a write-up.
In terms
Too
of
late.
foreign locations,
Right.
particularly, they think it's an imperative.
Yeah.
And young people sometimes think that they have to, not have a job and go off and learn and live these experiences before they can write about it. And it's not completely true. So you can send people down rabbit holes by believing that.
And even just like sitting on the internet, I mean,
Yes.
research can be fascinating, it can be
It can.
hugely entertaining,
It can.
and it's really easy
Time
to
suck.
be doing more research than you should be doing while
Correct.
doing less writing than you should be.
Correct. We see that.
Dennis has a great line when we interviewed him at the last year. He says, the research should be a great excuse for not writing fiction.
Yes.
Yeah, it's true.
We hear it all the time.
Yep.
People say I've spent a year researching it, but I can't
Right.
get started writing it.
Depends what your story is. Like I think what you were saying, it depends what you're writing. And if your story is in
No.
What?
No.
Stop playing with the jewelry.
If your story is familiar to you, if it's in your world and your time, you might not need to do that much.
Correct.
But as far as it goes from your experience, is as much research as you need to do.
Right.
And that sort of segues into the second half of what I was going to say. So I have one type of historical fantasy novel that I can do that kind of actual location research on. Then I have the Shatterbridge books, which the world is made out of whole cloth, completely invented by me. All the research for that involved kind of abstract thinking by reading fairy tales and folk tales and world mythologies and things like that, and incorporating that in a completely revised and altered form. That was the research for those novels. It had nothing to do with location because there is no such location.
But that was
That's
years and
fabrication.
years of your cultural education
Yeah.
and development.
There's a fine line between research and filling the well.
That's true.
Yeah. Yep.
But there's an interesting point there, though, because if you're going to create a place that's completely out of your imagination and completely,
Which a lot of fantasy
it's
does.
It's fantasy,
Fantasy does,
but isn't
yeah.
it kind of neat? I mean, the best science fiction that we've read growing up was the science fiction that they took an idea that was something that was this, and then we just sort of, well, what if it went this way, you know? And suddenly now you're in a realm of fantasy, but it came from someplace that sort of could be.
Well,
Well, I
that's
think-
the
I mean,
jumping off point from a
In my
real
mind,
idea.
there's a firewall between science fiction and fantasy.
There is.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
Talk to
Two
me about the
different kinds of
firewall.
fiction.
Talk about the firewall.
Well, it's just that. I mean, the fantasy is just like making this thing up out of whole cloth, and you're totally unconstrained, and you don't have to be basing it on anything. And science fiction is that kind of extrapolative thing,
Well, it has
where
the
you
word
kind of
science.
take this
Yeah.
idea,
Right.
and in my mind, there's kind of, however outlandish, there's an element of plausibility to it.
Exactly.
Where I think part of what fantasy is about is that it doesn't have that.
Right.
So could the
plausibility.
same firewall, the same theory or idea be applied to historical fiction. Because you hear that all the time, that historical fiction is not, it's fiction, but it comes from something, it's the same thing.
It might be a tiny kernel or it might be a huge pool, but
I'll also kick a hole in your firewall because you have novelists like China Mieville who wrote Perdido Street Station, which tends to be referred to as hard fantasy, where he's treated the fantasy world as if he's writing a science fiction world, and where while it bears no relationship to our world, it is so well researched, so precisely created that it's like reading a science fiction novel of an alternate place that does not and will not exist.
Yeah. I mean, there's firewalls and there's firewalls. No, absolutely. And that's one of the things when you're creating a world like this out of whole cloth, it still has to be absolutely internally consistent. You have to, you kind of have to create the material that you then research.
Your own research, yes.
Yeah, you have to make up your own rules,
exactly.
and they have to be the rules.
Yeah, and then you have, you don't have to just make them up. You have to make them up and then learn them and then follow them.
And that's because how many different examples do we have of stories that we know of or show? I mean, right down to the minions in the movies that we've been seeing.
Right.
That language they have is an actual language. They worked it out, and so they're actually talking to each other.
Right.
Really
it's a
weird
rule.
polyglot of languages.
Exactly right, and so exactly. And how many people still speak Klingon?
I know the head of the Klingon Institute. It's scary to know that.
There you go.
Anyways, yes, there are people who do that.
And there's a fascination with that, I guess. And
I
wonder if there's something inside of us.
I think there is.
Figures this out that goes, wait, this is sort of real.
I think there is. I think it's actually. I think it's the converse. Same thing, but I think it's like if it's not real, something goes off. The bullshit detector goes off.
Right.
If your setting's not consistent, if the language doesn't make sense, it's just not going to feel real. And I have absolutely nothing to base that on. But I think it's true.
In the acting world, we call it the sense of truth. Everybody has a sense of truth. Your audience has a sense of truth. Your actor has a sense of truth. And if you're in a scene and you're trying to create the scene and craft the character, and your sense of truth keeps going, no.
Bullshit detector.
It's your bullshit detector. It goes because an audience member will sit and watch something, and they'll in their brain go, I'm not.
There's something off.
Not buying it.
Yeah,
Not
there's
buying
something
it.
off. Exactly.
They don't even know why. They can't even figure out but their sense of truth. And it goes right back to maybe it's one of those things that just the logic is off. The history's off.
Something's not quite right.
So is it that relates to research? How?
Well, that relates to research in knowing the underpinnings of the world that you're writing in, whether it's something that you've made up or something that already exists.
It has to feel true, whether it is true or not.
You have to know it to a great depth.
It's like you're writing about characters in 50 BC Rome or something like that, okay? Well, they're all speaking English. So first of all, nobody's speaking like they would have spoken in that time period. So you've got to find the sound of a language in English that a reader will believe is the way these people would talk in this period.
But that's not research.
But it kind of is.
I actually think it is, Mary, because I think research involves creating a logic inside of your book that works. So research is part of creating that logic. If it's real, then you really need to do the research because, of course, part of the logic is the reality. Right.
I mean, I think it's a semantic question. I mean, I think there's research in getting to know a world that exists or a body of scientific knowledge that exists or whatever it is that you're basing your book on. But if you're basing your book on something that you are inventing, you still have to know that invention well enough that you can set your story in it without contradicting yourself.
That, so
but you still have to know it.
That's not research, that's creation.
Well, it's except for when you say, wait, what did I do? And you have to go back and look.
It's not research to look at your own work.
No, but it is.
I think it is. Well, I mean, again, you can roll your eyes. I think it's a semantic question, because if you don't do it and you ignore what the ground rules that
you have to do it. But that doesn't mean it's research. Research means finding out what you don't already know. It means exploring.
You've never looked something up twice?
It's your original research,
and then you have to refer to it. You're going into areas that you
don't
know anything about, or you know little about. It's going to find out more stuff. Research, applying that research, is what you were talking about.
Okay.
But not doing
authenticity.
It's a semantic
just for our audience, John is now rolling his eyes at Mary. So just to make sure.
John rolls his eyes at me whenever I have one.
I think I just framed one.
Can I ask one quick last question about research?
We have time for one more.
How do people gather their notes? How do you write by longhand? Do you type them on your computer? Do you use Evernote? Do you have a system? Colored stickies?
I do almost everything on my computer, just in a Word doc. Name of the book, research. research.
How about on your phone?
I put a
Things
lot of
occur
stuff
to
on
you.
my phone, but then I
And
send
you
it to
your
myself
computer.
and put it in that file.
Yep.
you
I'm
know?
a big Evernote flagger.
Yeah,
so.
I like Evernote.
I'm a
I also
flagger.
will go to a library and look at a book, and if it's got a lot of stuff in it that I
Steal it.
really want, I will go.
You
and,
steal it?
Yeah, not steal it. I will go and buy a copy of that book because I'm going to mark
Yes,
that book.
I do. If I
I'm
know
gonna
I
use
want the book.
highlighters and
Yep.
pencils and
Yes,
everything else
I do
for
the
the
same.
things that are important. So I have to own the book. I
See, and
can't
the history
just
book,
throw
the
it out.
two history books I did for Arcadia were both based in pictures. It was a little like doing a documentary, which meant the story came from the visual. So literally, I remember we moved the furniture out of our dining room, and I had almost 300 pictures, and I put them in piles and
Yeah.
moved them around
I've done that too.
physically
Yeah.
to see where they all went, and that's what you know.
Yeah.
And once I got the visual story, now I sort of understood the visual story. Now and then I start to drill down and find the oral history and get back and do the research, which involved me going to people's houses, sitting down with people and talk to them, saying, "So tell me about this." And
Well, a lot
then
of
capture.
And you
A lot of
start
people
finding the
use
shape of
use
where this
Pinterest.
thing goes.
Use Pinterest for that
Yeah,
to organize
because
the visual
there's that
thing.
other form of that research that's just like kind of getting the vibe, getting the
Yep.
atmosphere, getting the feeling,
The mood board.
surrounding yourself right, exactly. And I think there's another kind of research that people don't often talk about as research, but I think it could be really important, especially if you're kind of stepping outside of your comfort zone a lot, is having people usually people who have helped you with the research, who will vet some or all of your manuscript
Yes.
and read it to make sure that you're not making a fool of yourself.
I do that too.
Oh,
Or,
yeah.
or interviewing experts.
Yeah.
I was just going to say,
Critical.
interviewing
Yeah.
experts is
Experts,
big.
yeah.
I spent so much time in the Philadelphia Police Department talking
Your
with
way
the
out of things.
homicide.
Oh,
Yeah.
But did you record them or did you type the notes?
No,
Yeah.
I didn't take. I jotted them down
Yeah.
because I didn't want to interfere with the interaction.
It's just interesting to hear how people gather.
But then there's another aspect of research we didn't mention, a very specific one, which is costuming. Period. How people looked, what they did physically in that period,
That's a
and as
Pinterest
long as
board.
it's while photography exists, you're okay. Beyond that, you've got to go look at historical
Yeah.
costume books and see what people wore and how many layers.
That's
There
from
are
the
articles you
library.
can find online that will tell you how long it would take to actually undress a woman in the
Yeah.
1700s because there's a lot of
saw
clothing.
that. Yeah,
A lot
right.
of buttons.
It's
A lot of
just
buttons.
hilarious when you find that out.
Just
You
as you
go,
get
how did
Layers.
anybody ever get around to
Just
having
as you get her
sex?
clothes off, the husband starts to show up. Oh shit! Put this back on.
Right. But luckily, it takes him 2 hours to get there.
Yes, he's in a coach.
Yeah,
drawn
right.
by 2 horses. He's not going to get there till morning, so it's all right.
All right, so
All right.
we could probably go on like
we
the
will.
danger of research. We
Yeah,
could probably
right.
go
The
on
danger
forever
of
and ever.
research.
Yes, down the
So
rabbit
we
hole.
thank you all for joining
That's
us,
the next
and
time.
thank you guys, and that was fun. And let's
was
go
good.
have fun and have a
Go
nice
do some
evening.
research.
Go do some research.
Let's go drink some research.
Hop to it.
My pants are on fire!
Dance like there's no tomorrow.
Hello, podcast addicts and curious listeners. Dr. Galvanic's Odd Tales is a narrated podcast with dark, thrilling, and mysterious stories. In each episode, Dr. Galvanic's Odd Tales will take you through the mysteries of the Australian outback, lead you into a remote corner of the galaxy, or it will accompany you through a mind-bending nightmare. You can find Dr. Galvanic's Odd Tales on Apple Podcast, Spotify, iHeartRadio. Subscribe to the show so you won't miss another episode. See you out there.
This has been a presentation of the Project Entertainment Network.